Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to episode 32 of the ESG Show. Today we're talking about ESG and the supply chain. Now, this is a big topic, and no great revelation there. And there are lessons, I think, that businesses have been learning about the supply chain for years and years and years. Now, the COVID crisis, the Ukrainian crisis, have brought home a number of vulnerabilities that we've had with the supply chain. But what I think is quite interesting is I've done a little bit of digging, and all the talk that we're having right now about the supply chain, about its importance and how people don't appreciate how important the supply chain. This is not a new discussion. Alan Greenspan, former chair at the Fed, used to talk about the importance of the supply chain almost 40 years ago. And I also did a little bit of further digging, and I found this article dated from 2001, and it quotes Bill Helming, a former director of management consultancy PRTM in Waltham, Massachusetts. And he said, "It's reasonably obvious that Wall Street does not value supply chain prowess." And as I say, that was in 2001. Now, I think that another issue with the, if you just bear with me for just a second. Now, I wonder how much has changed since then. So in 2001, the supply chain was a contentious issue, and people were talking about, people don't pay enough attention to it, and enough emphasis on supply chain management. Is that still an issue today, I wonder? I think in the last few years, there's been a lot of people have become aware of the importance of things like auditing the supply chain. Full disclosure here, I do a little bit of consultancy work for a company called OCI, who are a supply chain company, and they talk about KISS, know your supplier's supplier. And I think that is a very important lesson from the supply chain. And of course, also these days, a word, I think, if anything, it's sort of like the word of, maybe it's the word of the year. Certainly the word of the year when it comes to business and supply chains is resilient. Everyone's talking about the importance of a resilient supply chain these days. And also, I think we've seen a trend. I think there's been a sense that supply chains have become too reliant on China, and that it's very dangerous to become reliant on one region of the world, which in turn has created an opportunity, I think, for other regions such as India, the ASEAN regions, and countries like Turkey and Mexico. But what has all this got to do with ESG? Well, the first thing is there's a G in ESG. It seems to me that good governance and a well-managed, resilient supply chain are inextricably linked. Then there is the issue of human rights in the supply chain and environmental considerations. There's things like the EU directive that it's currently winging its way through the various institutions in the EU, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which seems to be, and this is close to full ratification, and it says organisations trading in the EU have an obligation to align business strategies with the Paris Agreement, limiting global temperatures to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial revolution, 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial revolution levels, and it requires organisations to scrutinise their supply chain for human rights abuses. Organisations have until 2027 to comply with CSDDD, and they can face fines of 5% of global turnover if they fail to comply. I know CSDDD is a lot of letters, it's a nasty acronym, I just get tired saying it out loud, but it does appear to be an extremely big deal with massive ramifications for the supply chain and for ESG within the supply chain. Now, I don't want to say much more until we meet today's guests, but I do want to turn to something that's been garnering a lot of media attention, and that relates to a recent interview on the BBC programme Hard Talk, in which Stephen Sackur interviewed the president of Guyana, Arifan Ali. Now, the Guyana economy has been booming on the back of recent oil operations, and Saka asked Mr. Ali about the carbon impact. And this is what he said.
Do you know that Guyana has a forest forever that is the size of England and Scotland combined? A forest that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon, a forest that we have kept alive, a forest that we have kept alive.
Does that give you the right? Does that give you the right to release all of this carbon?
Does that give you the right to lecture us on climate change? I am going to lecture you on climate change because we have kept this forest alive that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon that you enjoy, that the world enjoy, that you don't pay us for, that you don't value, that you don't see a value in, that the people of Guyana has kept alive. Guess what? We have the lowest deforestation rate in the world. And
Okay, so now that clip has been heavily discussed on social media, and indeed Stephen Saka has come under criticism for his line of questioning. Although I'm not completely sure I agree with the criticism of Stephen Saka, it seems to me that the whole purpose of Hard Talk is to ask difficult and controversial questions. And just because Stephen Saka asked those questions, it doesn't mean to say that he believes in the underlying narrative that underpin those questions. But what I do think it did is it gave the president of Guyana an extremely good opportunity to make his argument, and I think he made it extremely well. Now we're going to be returning to this later, but that is enough for me for now. I wanted to introduce you today to today's guests. Hello, Bimal. How are you today?
Interesting introduction, Michael.
Well, nice for you to join us. Where are you dialing in from today?
I'm in London at the moment, so that's where I'm currently living and working. Although I do spend a lot of time in our operations in Southeast Asia as well.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Bimal Roy Banu boasts over 25 years of leadership and innovation, specializing in transforming operations through AI, optimizing supply chains, and establishing effective project management offices, leading to notable gains in efficiency and performance. As a certified expert in circular economy and sustainability, Mr. Banu helps to align businesses with sustainable practices to enhance operations within both blue chip companies and small medium enterprises. He started his entrepreneurial journey in 2013, and Dr. Banu founded Audit XPRT Limited, revolutionizing audit and compliance with innovative AI technology, leading to its acquisition by a UK public listed company in 2021. For this, he was the managing director of EduWorks UK, providing AI solutions to global companies. Dr. Banu's career spans the Middle East, South Africa, Malaysia, and Singapore, giving him diverse international perspective. He's also a published author of fiction, non-fiction, white paper, and articles. So Bimal, I see that you've written some non-fiction books. I think your first book, is called The Lascaux Mysteries of Fate.
That's my first. Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh gosh, it really came out of trying to find something other than work to relax and sort of look at my creative side. So I was lucky enough that this book was picked up by a publisher. It focuses on a historical era of the British Empire and a group of people called the Lascars from Southeast Asia. Rarely spoken about, but I combined that with a murder mystery to make it more accessible. So that's a background, and I continue to write stories as well as white papers, etc.
Okay, well, thank you. Now, well, good luck with that book. Anyway, I hope it goes well. I must admit, I would love to write a fiction book. I've written a couple of non-fiction books, but I've attempted. I've got so many first sentences of books which have never got beyond the first paragraph. But anyway, so you specialize in transforming operations through AI. So can you tell me, how does AI tie in with ESG?
So past 13 years has been about automating large parts of compliance and regulatory reporting. Where it fits in with ESG is one of the major challenges for companies, suppliers, any part of ESG is collecting data, analyzing data, making sense of it, and processing it. Much of it, when companies do have the data, and that's an entirely separate conversation about the lack of ESG data, but when they do have it, it's been collected manually through the use of Excel spreadsheets, etc. But given the explosion in the regulations globally, we need a system that can use intelligence to help companies to make sense of that data, to collect it, and then map it against all the formal disclosures. So that's our approach then, but in terms of the software bit.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Well, I look forward to talking to you again in a few minutes.
Thank you, Michael.
Also on the show today is Dr. Ankita. We seem to be doing well for doctors today. Hello, Ankita. How are you today?
Hi, Michael. I'm good. Thank you. How about you?
Yes, I'm excellent. And now you're dialing in from India today.
Yes.
And we were talking about this earlier. I was a bit fed up because it's a bit cold today, and I wish spring would hurry up. And you were telling me that people are predicting temperatures of 50 degrees.
Yes, so it is pretty warm. It is pretty warm out here, Michael. So if you're feeling too cold, I suggest that you take a trip to India. So I'm dialing in from New Delhi, and the temperatures are actually increasing, and we are predicting to touch probably 50 degrees this summer. But let's see how it goes.
Okay. Well, so Dr. Ankita Kashyap, have I pronounced that correctly? I don't think I have I?
Yes, no, it is correct.
Oh, okay. There's a surprise. Brings over a decade of experience in delivering sustainability research and advisory services to marquee international organizations across various sectors. She holds a doctoral degree in sustainable supply chain, and she's the founding partner of FSR Management Advisors, an Indian-based sustainability consultancy firm. As head of the ESG vertical, she specializes in capacity building, trainings, ESG strategy formulation, supplier sustainability, ESG reporting, and disclosures, among key services. She has actively contributed to government regulatory bodies in shaping national sustainability reporting guidelines and has collaborated with prominent global organizations such as GIZ, the German organization dedicated to promoting sustainability in India. So, Ankita, I was quite impressed that your PhD is in sustainable supply chain. I don't think we can. I find it hard to imagine anyone more qualified to talk about ESG in the supply chain than someone that's got a PhD in the subject. But I'm going to be very mean, and I'm going to ask you to summarize in 1 minute something that probably took you several years to write. So tell me about your PhD and tell me about sustainability in the supply chain.
Right. Thank you, Michael, for that introduction. And yes, my research took almost close to 6 years to finish. My thesis is almost 300 pages, but for you, I'll just try to sum it up in a minute. So jokes aside, the study that I did on sustainability, talking about the supply chain, buyers and supplier collaboration, that finds that, sustainability practices, it generates a collaborative advantage for the entire supply chain. So sustainability practices, you can say, acts as a catalyst that significantly improves the performance of both the buyer as well as the supplier. It is worth noting here that the effectiveness of sustainable collaboration will be dependent on various factors according to my study, which is how are these sustainability activities integrated into the collaborative supply chain practices? Is there a clear communication and understanding of requirements of the partner firms? So this is very crucial to understand in the supply chain domain. And one another finding that my study has, and also it asserts that the buyer supplier collaboration should not be limited to engaging with the suppliers only, but rather we should be looking at from point of view of constant progression by providing regular training and supplier development programs. And this progression must continue until the cost-effective and efficient buyer-supplier relationship is established. So I think I could explain that in a minute if that makes sense.
Well, while we're talking to you again shortly, why don't we come back to it then,
Sure.
and we can go into more detail. Okay, so that's great. Thank you for that, Ankita. Now, I am very interested to know about your perspective on the state of sustainability in India. Can you tell the audience about that?
So, well, I would say that there is a growing recognition of ESG factors in India. It is increasingly being considered as a very critical component from the viewpoint of business strategy, or be it policy making, or the entire societal development, so to say. While we've always had, prominent Indian organizations such as the Tatas and the Wipros, who have long been recognized for their responsible corporate practices, but I would say the concept of ESG is now gaining more traction, both as a risk assessment and an opportunity evaluation tool here in India. So even the smaller sized organizations in India, and particularly those who are serving as suppliers to the international markets, they are increasingly viewing ESG as not only a compliance requirement, but also as a means to gain a competitive edge over the global counterparts. And they do see it as a business case to implement ESG practices more robustly here.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So you're going to be joining us again shortly. For the time being, I'll say goodbye and say hello to you again in a few minutes' time. And in the meantime, we're going to be joined by Grant. Hello, Grant.
Yeah, hello, Michael. Good to see you again.
Yes, I was going to say Grant is a returning guest. I think you were on one of the very first episodes we did, weren't you? I think it might have been episode 3 or 4 or something. It was one of the very early ones anyway. So good to have you back. Now, Grant is an internationally recognized non-executive director, enterprise risk and resilience and ESG professional, working as an advisor to global organizations on developing, enhancing and building their ESG risk and resilience capabilities. He works with client organizations around the world, helping them to understand how ESG risk and resilience can be applied to as part of innovation and success in an increasingly complex and uncertain world, building sustainable future-ready enterprises. Grant is a global ambassador for Institute of Risk Management and chair of the IM Energies and Renewables Special Interest Group. So anyway, I'm glad to hear you're an ambassador, Grant. Do I have to call you sir, or am I all right calling you Grant?
Yeah, just plain old Grant. And I'm sorry to say, in some ways, Michael, it's a very grandiose sounding and very fancy title. I did look, with these airline memberships and they say you can put something like in front of your name, like a doctor. So unlike Bimal and Keita here today, who and congratulations to them on their fine work on getting PhDs. That's a lot of work. You can put that doctor in front. I know ambassadors can do it. And I once thought, I wonder if you can do it on this, but no, you have to be a real ambassador for a country or something. Never mind.
That's a shame, isn't it? That's a real shame.
It is. But it's one of those voluntary roles, and it's really just a matter of, spreading the word on risk management, really, on behalf of the IRM. And if I can give a quick plug for them, please, the leading global professional body for risk managers, and they're based in London. I think membership's around probably 20,000 plus members worldwide. So,
okay, could do with all of them watching the ESG show, I think. Well, anyway, Your Excellency, I guess to call you that as an ambassador. You're living in Turkey, aren't you? But I get the impression from your accent, I don't think you were brought up in Turkey somehow.
Yeah, no, that's a bit of a long story, and I always like to give the potted version, but it's very much a risk management story, Michael, and it's one, when I think about it now, it was actually 15 years ago this month that I moved to Turkey, having lived in the UK for a number of years. And I started out doing work here. I was based in London working for a division of Fitch Ratings, and we were doing enterprise risk. And at the time, the big drive was on capital adequacy, credit risk and liquidity with major banks in the region. And I was back and forward to Turkey a lot. And that started my association and affinity with Turkey probably about 17 years ago. And being a good Aussie, I'd had a number of years in the UK and love it. I mean, Britain really is our mother country. And but the weather did get to me, and I thought I'm looking for a bit of a warmer climate. And I made the decision to move to Turkey, always thinking I'll give it a few years. And I think I'm stuck here these days. But it is what it is. But part of my IRM voluntary role as a global ambassador is for Turkey and the region is my focus. And that's very much on spreading the word on risk and also that key thing, resilience. And that's a really big drive for us at the IRM. And of course, that ties in a lot to ESG and to a whole range of other things, corporate governance. That's really one of the big things right now is risk and resilience.
Okay, so as we say, I think resilience is the word of the year. It's a word I hear a lot these days. Can you very briefly get to the crux of what we're talking about today, which is ESG in the supply chain? We're going to go into a lot more depth as the show continues, but can you just give us a brief overview? What has ESG got to do with the supply chain?
Well, I think the big one for most people, Michael, is the E part, the environmental. And if we look at some of these pieces of legislation now that we're all talking about, there really is that genesis of these things in the E side. But equally, it's also about the G side, which you've already mentioned. And the part of it is really understanding how robust supply chains are. One of the big things is organizations fail. And I'm really pleased that you mentioned something. It's often not those, let's say, first degree, those initial suppliers, but it's that extended enterprise, those third parties. No, it's the fourth parties, the fifth parties, the end tier relationships where things come unstuck. And and that really is a big part of getting that G bit. So firstly, we as an organization really on top of our E and our S especially, are we executing well? Do we have confidence in what we're doing, what we're being told? But how do we extend that into that extended enterprise? How do we get that certainty? How do we get that clarity? How can we have confidence that what's going on is indeed what's going on? And our decisions, our risk profile, everything is driven by the quality of information and, more importantly, the quality of relationships that we have in supply chain. And you overlay the ESG piece, there's a lot of common, let's say, good corporate governance, risk and resilience practices there, but there's also this ongoing environmental conversation as well. That's quite a key part.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Grant. So Grant will be joining us again shortly. I want to introduce you to our fourth guest this morning, Steve Stobo.
Hi, Michael.
Or Stobo?
Stobo, first time right.
Oh, right. Okay. How are you today?
Yes, I'm good, thanks. I'm over here in sunny and rainy Newbury all at the same time.
Oh, right. Okay. So, but I think I'm right in saying you were recently in Tenerife. So
yes, I was there last week for my big family holiday for my sister's 60th birthday. So I've just managed to sober up. So I'm here to present.
Okay. Well, glad to have you on the show.
Cool.
So Steve is the founder of CCS, a leading ISO consultancy, cybersecurity and third-party risk management services and solutions provider. CCS helps organizations of any size improve their businesses, manage their risks, and improve their security. As stakeholders, including investors, customers, employers, and regulators, place great emphasis on ESG factors. Steve helps organizations implement key ISO standards, including, and here we go, ISO 9001, ISO 14001, ISO 45001, ISO 27001, ISO 22301, and ISO 5001 to help them enhance their performance. Gosh, those were
That's a lot of numbers to remember.
It is. So now you're also interested in, I think, in the intersection of cybersecurity and ESG. Can you tell us how cybersecurity relates to ESG?
Yeah, sure. A lot of people don't, I suppose, some people don't really understand about cybersecurity fitting into two key aspects of ESG, and that's both the S and the G elements. from a social responsibility point of view, cybersecurity is really crucial for protecting sensitive information, maintaining data privacy, and these are all important social considerations. If you imagine if your data's breached and all your information's leaked onto the dark web, that can have significant harm to individuals, to the company itself, to the communities, but also to society as a whole. And ensuring that you've got really robust cybersecurity measures demonstrates, I suppose, the company's commitment to social responsibility by really safeguarding the interest and also the rights of their stakeholders and customers, etc. And then on the governance side, effective cybersecurity is really a key component of good corporate governance. It involves making sure you've got the right policies, the procedures, you've got the oversight mechanisms, all these in place to protect against cyber threats. And companies with really strong governance practice typically prioritize cybersecurity as part of that risk. So that's where it kind of fits in really solidly in the S and the G elements of ESG.
Okay, thanks for that. As you can tell us a little bit about what CCS does and what you do.
Yeah, we're a consultancy organization that really specializes in helping businesses thrive through ISO consultancy and certification, cybersecurity services, and also third-party risk management. But ISO is really at the heart of what we do because we believe in getting the foundations in place to make sure businesses are operating in an ethical way, in a sustainable way, and making sure that they're actually meeting the requirements of their customers and stakeholders, etc. From a security point of view, we obviously provide a whole host of different security services ranging from risk assessments through to security posture reviews. We have a managed 24/7 security operations center, etc., pen testing. But we also do, and this picks up on some of the points made earlier around third-party risk management, where we help organizations implement a platform that can risk assess those third, fourth, fifth, sixth layer suppliers to make sure that they've got the right governance in place themselves, that they're meeting security standards and where the risks are within their supply chains from a sort of cybersecurity and governance and compliance point of view.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Steve.
No
so Steve will be joining us again a bit later. In fact, Steve is going to stay now, and I'm going to welcome all of our guests back. But actually, I wanted to talk about the hard talk clip. I'm just going to quickly run that hard talk clip again.
You know that Guyana has a forest forever that is the size of England and Scotland combined, a forest that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon, a forest that we have kept alive, a forest that we have kept alive.
Does that give you the right? Does that give you the right to release all of this carbon?
Does that give you the right to lecture us on climate change? I am going to lecture you on climate change because we have kept this forest alive that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon that you enjoy, that the world enjoy, that you don't pay us for, that you don't value, that you don't see a value in, that the people of Guyana has kept alive. Guess what? We have the lowest deforestation rate in the world. And guess what? Even with our greatest exploration of the oil and gas resource we have now, we will still be net zero.
Okay, I just wondered if you could, if anyone's got any thoughts on that. Sort of open house, really. Say what you will within reason. Does anybody want to go first?
Sorry.
BBC nil, President of Guyana 1 on that one.
I think on a serious note, I think, look, this is a debate that's been raging continually. It's a geopolitical debate between the West and the developing nations in the East in terms of the owners, who takes responsibility in terms of carbon reduction. I think that debate was interesting in the sense it alludes a lot to carbon offsetting, and using carbon offsetting as a basis to show that we're doing something. I've got some real concerns around the whole carbon offsetting, but I think that one, to me, really, for me anyway, was really about the geopolitical differences and really not to be lectured on how to on what certain countries should be doing. I mean, given, particularly in oil and gas exploration, we work with a lot of oil and gas companies, so I can't say that I don't benefit from them, but it's clear that the West has prospered immensely over it, and so I think the president of Ghana needs a real thumbs up to saying things that really should be said. So that's kind of my view on that topic.
I think that's a good point. Anybody else? Sankita, have you got anything to say?
Yes, I think I'll have to agree with Dr. Bimal here. I think this is a perfect example of, varying perspectives of developed and developing nations when it comes to climate change. While I think we can all agree that all nations share the common goal of mitigating its impact, their approaches and priorities may differ significantly. Uh, for developing nations, they're trying to strike a balance between economic development and environmental preservation, which remains paramount for them. Uh, However, I think it's essential to acknowledge that these environmental risks, which are associated with industries like oil and gas exploration, which have a significant detrimental effects. Uh, the solution that I see is that if we can create global awareness and reduce demand for such products, there could be certain critical steps in curbing their environmental impacts. And what is clear from this video also is that we require collaborative efforts, which are indispensable in addressing climate change. We need solidarity and we need collective action from all nations to, kind of confront this pressing global crisis that we have.
Okay, thank you for that. Grant, you seem fairly keen to talk. I mean, aside from the fact that the BBC got beaten on that one.
Yeah. No, I think it's a matter of responsibility, and I think we have to treat everyone as adults in the room and work on the basis that in Guyana they're doing their oil and gas exploration and production in a responsible way. And I think what we've found is that the global market has tended to find some sort of balance here in terms of how they embark on exploration and production. And like Bimal, I'm an oil and gas guy as well. I'm an energy guy as well. Do a lot of work with them, and so I'm not sort of putting my hat on here just defending them for the sake of defending them. But I've seen firsthand over decades the amount of work that the energy sector at large, the amount of effort and investment they actually put into rehabilitation, into improving practices, safe practices, environmentally friendly practices. It has become really quite advanced. And I think the markets now tend to weed out, let's say, the more unsophisticated players. So I think what you find is that their processes are probably aligned with world best practice. And we can then boil this down to one very simple premise, in my opinion, and that is great, that they could take a view of, we could tear down most of that forest, and with a lot of that oil and gas money, we can now start to have development and put up condominiums and build mega cities and what have you, and that would be detrimental to the environment. So credit to them, they haven't done that. They're maintaining their natural 19.5 gigaton very large forest there, and if they're indeed extracting and selling hydrocarbon products, good for them. If they're using that to invest in their economy to improve the quality of life, to bring education, good health services, a high standard of living, for their people, that's great. What we need to also keep in mind, and as an Australian, I've seen a lot of criticism of the coal industry, and this ties very much into the Scope 3 conversations and the Scope 2 part as well. To what extent are we liable for what the end users do with those products? And so there's also been massive improvements in efficiencies and new technologies and abatement technologies, all these sorts of things. So it doesn't necessarily mean you mine 1,000 barrels of something or 1 million tons of something and it immediately becomes tons and tons of carbon these days. Actually, the intensity is in terms of the proportion of carbon emitted per ton or kilogram or barrel burnt is much, much less than it was 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago. I think we need to balance the conversation, taking into account that entire value chain. Sorry, it was a bit long-winded, that explanation, but I hope I didn't lose.
That's fine. And Steve, any comments on that yourself?
Yeah, it's nice to actually see that they're using carbon offsetting against, obviously, the impact they're going to have with drilling and exploration and fossil fuels, etc. But we see a lot of businesses still offsetting carbon, but not getting their own house in order. And I see that as a real bad form of greenwashing, like Dr. Bimmel said earlier. And if it's used as a substitute for meaningful efforts to reduce carbon emissions rather than as a complementary measure, and businesses need really to get a framework in place for themselves to manage their own environmental impacts and not just try and offset it to other areas and other geographies, saying we're green, etc. Get their own carbon emissions, make sure it's transparent, make sure it's accountable, and it's done in a systematic manner. And I think, I can see both sides of that argument. Well, it wasn't really an argument, that slightly heated discussion, and I'm sympathetic to both.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that, guys. Now, because I want to push on with the show. We're going to come back and talk about a couple of other media stories a bit later. But I want to have a chat with each of our guests individually for the time being. And I'm going to kick off with a chat with Dr. Bimmel. Hi there again.
Hi.
So, why is it crucial, do you think, for suppliers, especially SMEs, to engage with ESG practices?
Okay, I think let me start answering that by saying that, look, the whole area of subject ESG is still a mystery to many clients of all sizes, but particularly to SMEs who, let's face it, by their size and operations, are more focused on their day-to-day operations and how to make money and how to stay afloat. And also, I think you mentioned earlier about the EU changes and in the States. A lot of this been diluted over the last month or so, which may give SMEs the idea that they can sort of hold back on ESG adoption. Look, when we're working with SMEs, we always say, look, there is a bottom line commercial benefit for you to adopting good ESG practices, and to be ahead of the curve, because whatever we think individually about when the full compliance around supply chain reporting comes in, it will come in over the next 2 to 3 years. So for supply chains, in order to stay competitive, in order to stay as a preferred supplier, in order to demonstrate to companies, particularly if they're operating in developing areas and developing countries, that, hey, we're worth investing in. We're talking about a global supply chain issue here. Then by adopting good ESG practices and understanding where they are currently through a kind of readiness assessment approach, they can then say, okay, we need to improve on the E, S, and G bit. Look, there's a lot of focus on the E, but I can tell you that in terms of from procurement all the way to supply chain management, most companies have fallen down on the S and G. So whether that's human rights, working conditions, whether there's anti-corruption, bribery, whatever it is, those things happen frequently. So for me, the reason why SMEs should worry and should be concerned about it is from purely for maintaining their current business and enabling them to grow. The final thing I would say for SMEs, and we always point this out, that by showing good adoption and ESG practices within the operations, they're likely to have a better chance of securing finance and investment in that, because it's all about de-risking it from an outside perspective. So I think it's really important. This is not just about saving trees, not just about saving planets. This has a direct commercial benefits for SMEs in the supply chain.
Okay, so thanks for that. And so can you just go, I think you touched on it just now, but can we sort of drill in a little bit about the benefits to organizations for ESG in the supply chain? I mean, obviously you've got the CSDD, which is kind of, it's going to make it compulsory, assuming it goes through Parliament.
Well, look, I think that those reporting standards will come in and requirements will come in some shape or form, even if they're diluted. I know for the CSDD that it's focusing on companies of a certain size and turnover, But what I'm noticing in the marketplace is, regardless of whether a company has to report from this year or next year, those principles of ESG are starting to come in terms of from procurement all the way to supply chain management. So those elements are coming in. And the reason why they're coming in is those chief main procuring companies are trying to de-risk going forward in terms of who they use as suppliers. They base that on investment decisions, on which area to invest in, which country, which sector to invest in, and also to start to establish the framework. So when they are required to report, they will report. We were talking to working with a company recently in South Africa, and they export a huge amounts of their work of their products to a car maker in Europe. And despite, there has been a lot of confusion about, what do they need to do, but there's been a directive sent down by that main client saying, you're going to have to start demonstrating to us in robust data, in clear evidence what you're doing, because sooner or later this is going to come in. So I think for them, it is a direct link between good ESG practice and good, if you like, securing a commercially viable future. And I think there's a direct revenue and ROI kind of equation you can make out of this. So I think this is what I'm saying. I think, Michael, a lot of it you need to reach out to SMEs and talk about it in practical sense, rather than from a ecological or a sort of let's do good sense, because these people are going to be hard pressed. The final thing I would say is the biggest challenge they have is in terms of capability and understanding, but that's something that companies can help them with. But there is a direct financial benefit.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Bimel, for that. That's all really interesting. Bimel, I'm gonna sort of say goodbye to you for a few minutes, and then say hello to you again a bit later when we'll have when we'll all get together again. But thank you for that.
Okay.
And now I'm going to have a brief chat with Ankita, Dr. Ankita. Hello again.
Hi.
So what would you say are some of the key challenges companies face in implementing sustainable practice throughout their supply chain? And I suppose I'm particularly interested in this from an Indian perspective as well.
Right. So as Dr. Bimal rightly mentioned, that the suppliers who are small and medium enterprises, there are various challenges that they face in the supply chain. And to begin with, they do have resource constraints, that pose a great amount of challenge in investing in sustainable technologies and practices. They are there to do their business, and they do face that trade-off between, the constraints that they have in terms of their resources. Also, I think I've also witnessed in the Indian supply chain that there's a lack of awareness and correct understanding regarding this critical topic as of now, which I feel is another challenge. But we do seek the focal company or the buyers to assist their suppliers in developing that kind of an awareness and understanding around these topics. Then another challenge that I can think of is, there are organizational barriers and resistance to change for any kind of a shift that has to happen. So companies back in India who are smaller in scale and operations do see, adoption of sustainable practices, as something which is not worthwhile for now, and looking at it from the point of view of resisting that kind of a change. Also, I feel that there's a lot to do with the transparency and the traceability aspect across complex supply chains. So, be it a textile sector, for example, it is easier to know your first and second tier suppliers, but to go ahead and look at your third, fourth tier suppliers and to kind of identify and address all the sustainability risk becomes a bit of a challenge there. But how I look at it is that there has to be fostering collaboration and engagement with the suppliers and the stakeholders. That will be very crucial to kind of have a holistic approach towards sustainability in supply chain. And as Dr. Bimal correctly mentioned, that we should be looking at a more holistic approach where we say that this is more of a business case. This will provide competitive advantage, and not looking at only from a compliance perspective.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I'm very interested in your thoughts about the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which Eric correctly pointed out earlier is being voted on the 24th of this month. It's gone through a number of hurdles. It's still got a few hurdles left to go.
Right.
As I understand it, I think it's probably past the most difficult hurdle, but maybe not. But in particular from an Indian point of view, what will be the impact of such, well, not so much an Indian, but an emerging markets point of view, really? Here you are, you're the representative of the entire emerging markets, just you. What will the impact of such global regulations on suppliers be, do you think?
Michael, the CSDDD, as weird as the acronym sounds, but this is more of a regulatory framework, and it would require companies to assess and mitigate their ESG risks which are associated with their suppliers' operation. So the impact of such regulations on global suppliers will definitely be very significant. Suppliers all across the globe, and especially in the emerging markets, will be compelled to kind of adhere to these stricter sustainability standards, address the ESG concerns in their operations as well. But again, I would say that given that what we discussed, there are various challenges for suppliers, they being medium small enterprises, not knowing too much around sustainability and how to embed it within their ongoing operations. If the buyers can provide innovative support initiatives, such as capacity building workshops or supplier collaboration platforms, any sort of technical assistance, uh, some fair bit of transparency, shared sustainability goals, I think that can pave the way for meaningful progress. So this will definitely enable the suppliers to view sustainability as a kind of a cultural shift, leading to a continuous improvement. They'll start seeing a business case in this, they'll start seeing that how this will improve their operations, than just seeing this more like a check the box exercise for them. And ultimately this would lead to more responsible, and as we mentioned, the resilient supply chains.
How ready do you think they are, in developing nations?
I see the supplier readiness with respect to ESG would be dependent on various factors. Again, given what kind of awareness do they have, what are the resources at their disposal, what are the regulatory environments that we are talking about. Now, I would want to put it under two categories here, where you will see some suppliers are proactively, they are embracing ESG principles. And then there's a section who's actually facing a lot of challenges because they have limited awareness, limited resources, and less stringent regulatory frameworks as well. But I think prioritizing the enhancement of supplier readiness is very essential and paramount. And again, I come back to the point where I say that organizations, they must explore innovative and creative avenues of making the suppliers also ready. For example, they could be disseminating cleaner production technology, know-how to the supply chain partners. You can develop joint plans to promote socially responsible behavior. So primarily, if you're able to leverage your partners' synergies in this entire supply chain for ESG practices, I think the supplier readiness will definitely enhance and will improve the business efficiency as well.
Okay, so thank you for that. And finally, one more question for you. What initiatives is India undertaking to ensure the sustainability of its suppliers?
Okay, so one key initiative that we have in India is our reporting framework. It's called the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting Framework. Now, this requires the top 1,000 listed companies in India to report on their sustainability efforts and performance. But in addition to this, recently we've also had a BRSR core framework, which has been introduced so that these listed companies are also now required to report on their suppliers' primary ESG attributes. So we've extended the reporting ambit to include the suppliers. Then we also have various other schemes that have been introduced in our country, one being product linked scheme, which is to incentivize sustainable production. We do have something that we call as extended producers responsibility that will hold manufacturers responsible for the end of life recycling, disposing the products. And there's a very interesting certification program also recently launched by Government of India, which is called the Z certification, zero defect and zero effect. Now, this aims to encourage the Indian industries to adopt, best practices in manufacturing processes, minimizing their defects and adverse environmental effects. So, if a supplier wants to get certified through this program, there are measures that are provided by the Indian government to help them understand the environmental bits of it, provides a framework where the organizations can benchmark, they can assess their parameters with respect to quality, productivity, energy efficiency, waste management, pollution control, and so on. So there are a lot of kind of initiatives that are taking place currently to ensure sustainability is there within the suppliers in India and providing them that global competitive edge over others.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Ankita, I'd be grateful if you could join us again in a few minutes. I want to have a brief chat with Grant now. Hello, Grant. Nice to have you back again. Again, having been back on the show before. I want to talk to you about how well do we really understand our extended enterprise and their commitment and competency when it comes to ESG.
Yeah, it's a great question, Michael. We sort of take a step back and we think about where we are today, we think about the extended enterprise and how have we ended up there. One of the big things is we tended to put for many, many years, risk took a back seat to financial returns. And so we looked at it, there are a number of reasons why we outsource, why we rely more and more on an extended enterprise. But and there's all the very good reasons for doing it. Do we have the capability, the competency? Is there something really new and innovative? I know over my many years, whether I've been in manufacturing or construction, whatever it's been, we do rely very heavily on our suppliers because there's things that we just simply cannot do. Sub-assemblies, completed goods, high tech, very specific or specialized processes. They're all very good reasons for doing it. But somehow we tended to let, and I'm very sorry for any financial people out there in the audience today, but we tended to let the financial people take over a little bit and say, well, how can we reduce capital employed? How can we carry less inventory? How can we get leaner supply chains? And look, there are some great benefits to doing that. And there are also some great environmental reasons for doing that. But we tended to let risk take a back seat and financial returns become more the driving reason for relying on these extended enterprises. And with that, we had a very big wake-up call around about 2020. Now, that seems a long time ago now when we put it in those terms, but we all remember what happened around about 4 years ago. And suddenly there was a massive wake-up call about we're suddenly dependent on organizations to supply us with some of the very essential things that we need in life. And I think that at a very fundamental level, there was just a lack of awareness of the level of risk that we carry in our extended enterprises. And so it really comes down now when we talk about ESG to about alignment. And there's a few things at play here. So as I said earlier on, it's about transparency, governance, having the confidence and all of the frameworks and the checks and balances in place. That's one thing. But there's two very other critical things. It's alignment, and it's alignment on things like vision, mission, values, and purpose. And we also need to recognize that there's differences in culture. We can get this, we can get the corporate culture, the company culture from one enterprise to another, from one organization to another. That's not unusual. But now we're in these global supply chains, these global extended enterprises, and the cultures are sometimes vastly different. And this presents a massive challenge on things like ESG, although it is becoming in the last couple of years very much front and center for many organizations, but there still are some fundamental cultural differences there, depending on where we go in the world. And so, ESG will be treated with great reverence in the more developed markets, A little bit less so in some of the developing ones, and in some parts of the world, they've got much more important things on their minds than ESG right now. So there's a number of factors there. So it's very difficult because there's a lack of awareness, lack of commitment and buy-in, as well as a lack of competency and skills. And I think, and maybe I'm jumping the gun a bit here, but when we talk about, again, some of the regulations and legislation coming in place, how difficult does that make it? We need to suddenly have to upskill people. I think Ankita sees this. She said she does a lot of capability development and capacity building, very similar to the things I do with risk and supply chain risk training and consultancy. Yet you've got to really build the awareness and the capability and ability to execute. And that's where a lot of the gaps happen. And you become misaligned.
Okay, thanks for that, Grant. We're going to have to rush through the remaining questions. We're already over. How much risk are supply chain partners and third parties entities exposing us to, do you think?
Yeah, I think that the earlier thing, your KYSS one, know your suppliers, really big, and not enough questions are asked. I was with a client in the Middle East 2 or 3 months ago, and we had some very extensive, in-depth workshops, over a period of time, and we were talking specifically about some pure risk-related things. And this sort of question came up about how much risk is being carried in the extended enterprise, and people sat there saying, we can't possibly go and ask to look at people's risk registers and understand it. And someone there from another division of that very large corporation stood up and said, no, we do in our part of the business, because all these other people are our we are their customers. In some cases, they're our customers, but we actually go in and we demand to get information. And so there's a lot of it there where people do go and ask questions. And part of that question is to then ask, well, who are you relying on and who are they relying on? So the questions in the more sophisticated organizations do get asked.
Okay. And has the ESG regulatory and legal framework in place today led to a situation where the default situation is adherence to a tick box mentality? Have we created a rush to improve rules and regulations which are unreasonable and unrealistic, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Politicians go around and come up with these great ideas, and as we see now, they then politics gets in the way and they try and water them down. I think we have gone maybe a little too much to the tick box, because there's a lot of fear, but there is a lot of cost involved. And with all the best will in the world, it costs money to do these things, and it's not fit for everyone. As I've said before, Michael, in previous show last year, I think we have to make sure it's like anything we implement, it needs to be proportionate, affordable, aligned, and have impact.
Okay, thank you for that, Grant. Grant, if you could join us again in a few minutes when we round up, because I wanted to bring in Steve. Good to have you back, Steve.
Yeah, hi again, Michael.
Steve, now, how do organizations address environmental sustainability within its operations and supply chain? And how does ISO 14001 support these efforts? So maybe you could start by telling us what ISO 14001 is, and then talk about how that relates to ESG and indeed the supply chain.
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, I'd probably like to flip it round onto what efforts people need to do first, and then maybe talk about how 14001 can support that, if that's all right.
Sure.
So it's pretty much the same question, but I think to get environmental sustainability, businesses need to focus on quite a few different key areas. The first one, and these are not necessarily in order, but it's having efficient resource management in place to make sure that they're actually optimizing the resources that they're already consuming, such as energy, water, raw materials. And this can reduce the impact, but also actually save money as well. And they need to do things like invest in energy efficient technologies. EVs, we're seeing LED lighting, lower cost, better machinery, better extraction, lower consuming things, and also implement water conservation measures as well. And another element around the resource is making sure that whatever materials and ingredients they actually use, whether they're manufacturing or whether they're producing cakes or whatever it might be, are both sustainable and from an ethical source as well. And then there's waste reduction and recycling. minimize the waste reduction, make sure you've got recycling bins in the right place and you're actually doing the correct levels of recycling inside the business, because this also reduces the environmental footprint. And implement waste reduction initiatives, establish proper recycling programs, and maximize the reuse of resources and materials as much as possible. Then we come on to pollution prevention, implement the correct measures to minimize environmental contamination. And this is essential for really sustainable operations. Making sure they implement pollution control technologies, make sure they meet regulatory requirements for emissions and discharges, etc., but also conduct monitoring and reporting on their environmental performance. And then they've got to really engage with the suppliers, collaborate with them to promote environmental sustainability. And that is really, really crucial and has indirect environmental impacts if they don't. And organizations can work with their suppliers to help them improve their environmental performance, set sustainability requirements in procurement contracts, for instance, and support in implementing sustainable practices. And the way ISO 14001 helps with that is first to understand what it is. It's a management system that establishes a set of processes and procedures that systematically identify, manage, and improve environmental performance. And once you implement ISO 14001, organizations really promote efficient resource management, waste reduction, pollution prevention, supplier engagement, and really, really contribute to a sustainable operations and supply chain, but also meeting regulatory requirements. And the key thing now, especially with ISO 14001, is meeting that stakeholder expectations that you're not greenwashing, that you are an environmentally responsible organization to do business with.
Okay. And how do organizations ensure that suppliers align with environmental sustainability goals?
Now, what we're
conservation.
Yeah, what I've seen is a lot of the larger organizations now are looking to mandate, and I can't remember who mentioned it earlier, around almost forcing their suppliers to meet standards like ISO 14001 for environmental management. But they can also do this by integrating the environmental requirements that they have into their supply management processes, but make them in line with ISO 14001. So the very small suppliers don't necessarily have to go out and get ISO 14001, for instance, but make sure that it's built into their processes for supplier management. And that might be doing things like having correct supplier selection and evaluation based on the supplier's environmental performance. And that might be just purely the environmental performance working with them. Or it might be that they do have an ISO standard for environmental or other standards that show that they are environmentally responsible as an organization. But also the businesses can provide support and guidance to their suppliers to help them. We want to help businesses as much as we can. We hear a lot from especially the UK government about SME. But a lot of the pressure is being put on them rather than the corporates helping them out. Education, training, sharing best practices, not keeping things to themselves, and making sure that they collaborate on sustainability initiatives. And then there's the regular monitoring and auditing of supplier performance against whatever environmental criteria you want that suppliers to meet. But then having proper transparent reporting and feedback that they can share with the suppliers so they can learn how are they performing against other peers in small suppliers within their supply chain. And once you've done that, it means you can manage the risks better across the entire supply chain. And you get that alignment with environmental sustainability goals, also in line with the ISO 14001 requirements.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I just got one more question. Well, we are way over here, but I want to talk to you about ISO 45001, which I think relates to occupational health and safety for employees and stakeholders. You talk us very, very briefly. Can you just tell us what that is and how that relates to ESG and how that relates to the supply chain?
Yeah, again, ISO 45001 is a management system that looks to improve the operations and well-being and the health and safety of employees within an organization. There are tons and tons of benefits. I could spend hours talking about ISO 45001 for both the employees that work in an organization that has it, as well as the employer that actually has adopted the standard. But it's really about making sure that a business has assessed the risks within the organization to its employees, has identified known hazards, has this thorough risk assessment, any potential occupational health and safety risk and hazards within the workplace, assess the tasks, the processes, what people's working environments are. Do they have guards on the machine? Are they protected? Are they wearing the right equipment, etc.? And to determine potential sources of harm to employees and also the business as well. Then they need proper controls and also mitigating measures in there. These might include engineering controls, admin controls, but also, like I said, PPE equipment to prevent accidents, injuries, and also illnesses. They need to make sure that their employees are properly trained and aware of the hazards within their own working environment, and that they've got safe work practices. They know what the emergency procedures are, proper use of equipment and protective gear. And this helps ensure that everyone understands their roles and responsibilities for maintaining a safe and healthy work environment, which really helps, obviously, the employees, protecting them, but also the businesses as well. And what they also need to do is make sure they involve the employees within the whole decision-making process and hazard identification. It can't just be a top-down approach of going, you need to work this way. You need to get your staff involved in this. What is the best way of making it work? They're the ones that are on the shop floor that can spot the hazards, that can help with the risk assessments, that can also help with developing the occupational health and safety policies and procedures. But this really sort of fosters a great culture of safety and collaboration, and it helps businesses improve how they operate, helps them bring in efficiencies into the organization. But then they also have to prepare for the bad side as well, that emergency preparedness and response, making sure you've got those procedures and protocols in place, that if there is an accident, if there is an emergency, that people know what they need to do. And you do this by doing things like conducting drills, make sure you've got an emergency response plan. First aid is all signposted and everyone knows what you need to do. How do you get medical equipment? How do you get assistance, etc.? And making sure that the employees know what the emergency procedures are and make sure it's done correctly. And then as long as you monitor that and look for continuous improvement. And that's really what ISO 45001 is and how it can help organizations improve the health and safety and also the well-being, because we can't forget people's mental health as well. And there are areas of ISO 45001 that address that to make sure people feel safe in the workplace, not only from injuries, but also from emotional stress and strains as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Steve.
No worries.
Steve, I would like to just welcome back all our guests. By the way, Steve is joining us again next week when we're going to drill in a little bit more into the whole world of ISOs. So look forward to that discussion. I think we're well over here, guys, so I think we should draw this to a close quite soon. But there is a couple of stories that I wanted to briefly touch on. And Vimal, you spotted an article which I thought was rather interesting, about supply chain ESG laws facing an uphill battle. Can you just quickly fill us in on this story and what it means?
Well, I think I mean, as across the globe, but particularly this focuses on the EU, it is the challenges in introducing tougher regulations. So that there's been a whole host of there's been ambitious kind of move by the EU to introduce supply chain reporting into the whole disclosures that companies have to do. There's been a huge backlash against by companies, particularly large companies, against it, who do not want to kind of start reporting on supply chain because A, they don't know how to do it, and B, the risk that's associated with it. So there's been a kind of a toing and froing, but there has been a kind of a watered down amended policy that's going through the final hurdle in terms of approval. I think it will get approval, which means that companies of a certain size will have to start reporting, and they're the largest of the suppliers or of the companies, so they will have to. But for others, they don't necessarily have to start reporting now. I think what's interesting about this, Michael, and funny, I've just finished a paper on this particular what's happening, is that I think it'll still have an impact on supply chains in terms of companies actually saying to them, we need to understand where you are in terms of ESG adoption. We need to see some indication that you are starting to get that into your practices, and particularly supply chains, I think, from areas of the world that they might seem as being a little bit more risky. I think this will have a direct impact on some investment decisions that companies in Europe will make. So all of this, I think, will filter through right from procurement to the existing supply chain management. I think going back to the previous conversation, this is why it's so important for suppliers themselves, particularly SMEs, to be ready for this and to see this as a commercial challenge and not just a reporting challenge. So I thought the whole kind of toing and froing around this has been interesting, but it happens everywhere. America, the SEC tried to do the same thing, and there was court action, there was kind of pushback, and it just underlines how difficult it is. But what I always say to people is, whether it's happening this year, next year, or even the year after, this will come in at some point. And so you can pretend it's not there, but I think that's what the article's about. That I think there is something. I mean, this is going to have a change. This is going to have an impact. I think this goes much further than the SEC one, which has really taken a backseat. And I think it'll have a resounding impact on supply chains globally.
Okay, thank you for that. And I want to just touch on one more thing and maybe give you each about 30 seconds to give me your thoughts about this, which is Unilever. It calls on industry associations to step up climate efforts. And Rebecca Marmot, Chief Sustainability Officer at Unilever, said, our review of 27 industry associations revealed 8 have no public record of meaningful climate policy engagement with governments, 4 have low engagement, and 8 are misaligned with Unilever in one or more of our priority areas. She added, we know that becoming fully aligned will not be straightforward, but over the next 12 months, we will focus our attention on the practical and realistic actions associations can take. We want our associations to be catalysts for positive policy change, and if they can't, then we reserve the right to withdraw our membership fees. I'm just going to ask you all, we really are at the end now, so just try and make your answers really short, brief. Grant, do you want to kick off? 30 seconds, thoughts about Unilever?
Yeah. Are the industry associations out of touch, or is Unilever out of touch? I don't know. It's an interesting debate. I just will say one thing. Industry associations are there to represent the industry. And yeah, they have to do that. They have to advocate for them. So that's an interesting discussion to watch.
Okay. Ankita, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great step in the right direction by Unilever. Because the essence of ESG and sustainable practices is all on collective effort, and associations play a major role in sensitization and policy advocacy. So I would just say that it's a great initiative. If bigger companies like Unilever can withdraw themselves from these associations, it will be a big step to start taking these climate policy engagements very seriously.
Okay, thank you. Bimal.
I mean, I agree with Dr. Ankita there. I think this is a classic example where a company is taking the lead and the agenda. I see where Grant's coming from. There will be conflicting agenda here, but I think this is the way that this whole thing will move. It'll be leading companies that will push the envelope here. So I completely agree. I think it's an interesting move.
Okay, and Steve?
I don't know. I think simply it will have an impact. If it affects them financially, they will do something about it. If not, they will ignore Unilever and do whatever they want.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to leave you today with some words uttered a couple of years ago by Terry Smith. Now, Terry Smith is a very famous investor in the UK, often referred to as the Warren Buffett of the UK. And he was talking about Unilever. and he was being very critical of Unilever, and Unilever were talking about the purpose of Hellmann's mayonnaise, and he said, a company which feels it has to define the purpose of Hellmann's mayonnaise has, in our view, clearly lost the plot. So I thought that was quite interesting. But anyway, thank you all very, very much. Steve, see you again next week.
Yeah.
Bimel and Ankita are both coming back on the ESG show in, I'm not exactly sure, I think it's sometime in May.
Sometime in May, yeah.
When we're also talking about the supply chain, but we're going to do something slightly different. We're looking at the supply chain around the world. So we're going to have speakers from different regions of the world. And by the way, if you're watching this show and you're in one of those regions, if you're in the Far East or the Middle East or South America or Africa, and you're interested to talk about the supply chain, then please get in contact with me. But otherwise, thank you all very much for joining the show today. Thank you, and see you all again soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.